Yesterday, Politico reported that Congresswoman Katie Porter gave a moving speech to Democrats during a private caucus meeting last week on the subject of inflation. Porter supposedly told colleagues about a recent grocery store trip where she noticed bacon spiked to $10 a pound. But according to Politico, Porter's concerned her Democratic colleagues don't share her interest in connecting to working Americans.
Porter went on to blame the Russian invasion of Ukraine for disrupting the food supply. She added that corporations are taking advantage of the situation as a cover to price gouge. Porter boiled it down to having stronger antitrust laws to give competition to the 4 companies that control American beef packing and the 3 that control cereal. So this Politico story was very interesting. It was clearly, it's the kind of story that like Katie Porter is glad to have because it portrays her in this very favorable light. I'm sure there was some coordination to do that, which always makes me a little, so she said, according to Politico, where's the quote I wanted to highlight from this? She said that she was talking to her colleagues about how, if food costs too much and this is what people are concerned about. And some colleagues said in response, I didn't realize this was such a big issue. It's not really showing up in the polls. I'm like, what polls are you reading? Inflation is the top concern of Americans in poll after poll after poll. So is the Democratic Party that out of touch that they don't understand that they just totally sidetracked by Ukraine?
So
they don't understand what people are worried about.
The average Congress member is a multimillionaire, and that is not a partisan issue. And I think the reality is that there are very few folks like Katie Porter who actually do have a background that is working class. What was she, a teacher before joining Congress? She came in with the fleet of progressives, I believe in 2018. It might have been the following cycle. And she has kind of made her bones in talking about working class people's issues. She won in a red district. She's been able to keep that district, through more than one election cycle. And she's really demonstrated an ability to communicate with folks, I think, because she doesn't talk in these partisan terms and she understands what people on the ground are going through. It does not, frankly, surprise me at all that people in Congress, regardless of party, would be surprised that not only that the cost of bacon is up to $10, but that is even unusual because they aren't usually buying bacon at any price.
It's very, I love this quote, the Arrested Development, the Lucille Bluth. How much could a banana cost? $10?
Literally, we had a cycle, 2 years ago, where Nancy Pelosi got rightly dragged when she was bragging about her very expensive freezer that contained all this Talenti ice cream.
The freezer.
Which, look, it's not really about the ice cream. Like, ice cream, a pint of ice cream is kind of expensive no matter where you are. It's not about the idea of paying $7 for ice cream, but it's about the tone deafness of it all, right? It's about the fact that we were in the middle, or at the beginning rather, of a economic crisis driven by COVID and lockdowns. And that's where we were. So I understand your skepticism about stories like this getting written up, but I have no skepticism at all about how out of touch.
No, it certainly reflects a real problem. It's the kind of successfully positioning a story or placing a story in a mainstream media outlet flattering to your congressperson. It's a good skill. Congrats to Katie Porter's people for pulling it off. Absolutely.
Well, the push for Democrats to focus on the economy comes as 2/3 of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck as inflation is making it harder to make ends meet. Just yesterday, we learned the Consumer Price Index increased 8.3% from a year ago, higher than the 8.1% estimate according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics. President Biden spun the news as a win for Team Blue, saying, while it's heartening to see inflation moderated in April, the fact remains it's unacceptably high and bringing it down is my top economic priority. And while gas and used car prices did decline slightly in April, gas prices are back at record highs now, as well as new vehicle costs, food costs, housing, medical expenditures, utilities, airfare, and more.
Airfare prices I've had to fly a lot lately. It is ugly. It's ugly out there.
That's one way to keep people from not wearing masks on planes is to make it unaffordable to get on.
No. I was still on every one of those flights. I didn't even bring a mask. So, as you know.
All right, but here's the issue. Here's something that I've observed, and this bears some relationship to the radar I did yesterday. I've observed that some people, I believe it was Governor Newsom, had a plan to issue some gas relief. I think there's issuing some gas cards. There have been these other efforts by some Democrats in some parts of the country to provide some small bits of relief in that way. And I've seen some pushback from conservatives that say, well, you can't just give money out to people. This isn't fair. This isn't right. And it seems to me obviously in conflict with their message that they're the people that are in touch. Their solution seems to be, let's open up drilling, let's get more American oil, which, by the way, to the chagrin of many progressives, Joe Biden is in fact doing. He's doing what I think a lot of conservatives will want him to do, and in some ways taking the wind out of the sails of that message. So what do you make of conservatives posturing themselves as being pro-populist and looking out for the interests of working people in a way that some of these out-of-touch Democrats we're talking about with Katie Porter aren't doing, but also coming out against some of the relief efforts and characterizing them as Democrats trying to, quote, buy votes?
No, you're right. I think the Republican commitment to populism is insincere at best. I mean, it varies obviously from Republican to Republican. Some of this new class of the J.D. Vance type people who just won the Senate primary, who all likelihood will be the next Republican senator from Ohio. He's had a lot of sort of position evolutions as well. He was very anti-Trump, now is rabidly pro-Trump. An ultra MAGA, if we're using that that terminology, that I actually now think is being appropriated by conservative. It's on T-shirts and hats already. I'm in the basket of deplorables. I'm ultra MAGA, that kind of thing. But there is not a lot of. It's an insincere. I mean, there is a shift taking place. I notice it among like think tanks, like the Heritage Foundation, the major conservative think tank. I see how their positioning on or their rhetoric around their positioning is shifting to be more pro working class. But the easiest way they do that, people on the right do that, is to just amp up discussion of the cultural subjects where the working class has more conservative views and conservatives are much more happy to talk about, because that feels easier to bash the woke.
Yeah, because you can only go so far with your faux populism. The Heritage Foundation came up in my radar yesterday because we were talking about the lobbying interests that are making it so difficult for Americans to afford housing. And, one of the people from the clip that I played came up through the Heritage Foundation and is now advocating strongly against raising the minimum wage for workers, even as we see profits sky high for the top 0.1% in CEOs. They are choosing to do stock buybacks, distributions, paying themselves instead of actually funneling the money toward the people who have created all of that wealth. So it is interesting to see whether or not there are any political realignments that come out of the economic crisis.
There's a lot more conversation about antitrust in Republican circles, in conservative think tank circles, like way, way, way more than there was in the aughts or the 90s or the 80s. So there is a realignment, going on to some extent. It's going to be interesting to see if any policies ever do come out of that. But this is a different. I mean, that's why I said when Elon shared that that chart saying, well, Democrats have just moved left, Republicans haven't. Right? I mean, the grain of truth to more than a grain. The truth to that is that Republicans are less. I mean, it's almost like less libertarian, less of my direction in some ways on economic issues than they were in the in the era of the Tea Party, when we want less taxes, less spending, less regulation.
And just far more right when it comes to the social issues, like
they're far more right
whether
on,
or not racism is real or.
They're far more right on. They've moved further right on immigration. I think that's the very clear one. The social stuff, I don't know. Their views on
abortion rights.
But their views on abortion were. I don't think they're more conservative than they were in the 90s or the aughts.
Well, the reality is when Roe v. Wade was decided, people are talking about this a lot now. It wasn't a controversial decision. It was a bipartisan.
The 70s, sure, yeah.
Decision, and it was created. It was made into a polarizing issue by the Christian right as they gained power in the Republican Party. The majority of Americans today, Republicans today, support maintaining Roe. Even if you ask them different kinds of questions about how they feel about abortion, obviously polls come up with different results. So there does seem to be a way in which both parties just have gone in different directions on different axes, but the people in the middle, the overwhelming majority of Americans still want, I'm sorry, I got to say it, Medicare for all, student debt cancellation, or $15 minimum wage.
I think a conservative would say the inability to acknowledge the existence of women of a major progressive organization.
What do you mean by that?
Is more.
What do you mean by that?
The
Robby?
ACLU tweet I'm referring to.
So who in your life hasn't acknowledged the existence of women? I'm sitting here a woman, and I've heard this is expanding a lot, so we might as well just be specific about what we mean.
I'm talking about the ACLU. It's indicative
Are
of
you
a
talking
kind of...
about the broader trend in some very niche liberal circles to
birthing persons?
Yeah, because there exists some trans people who identify as men who can be pregnant because they can.
Absolutely, there are edge cases to everything.
Right. So I'm curious, Robby. I've never personally met a pregnant trans man. Right. I have met some trans men. I've met no pregnant trans men. If you were to meet one, would you refer to them as a pregnant woman?
I would use whatever language makes them most comfortable.
So maybe even birthing person.
Well, if that individual person wants that language, sure. But that just because there are rare, like every category has rare exceptions to it. Yeah. That doesn't mean the category doesn't exist or is false.
Yeah, look, I think
I'm not accusing you of saying that at all, but there is a dancing around that now going on in a lot of language. It's creeping its way from like educational centers into how these things are taught and discussed. And you can be for that. You can say that's fine. I'm just saying that is fairly radical. And
is it radical just to defer to
radical new language?
Well, it is new, and I'm not going to sit here and say it's not uncomfortable for probably most people, just like any new thing is uncomfortable. Like I said, I've only had the pleasure of meeting a couple of trans men in my entire life. It is what it is. But I also am really skeptical of why it is that this is such a huge part of the conversation when neither of us have ever been in an intimate personal situation where it's ever come up. I appreciate that there are some fringe parts of the left who perhaps overextend themselves to seem like they're doing the right thing. But if I have a choice between a party who is hypersensitive to just wanting to be nice to people and not making them feel uncomfortable, and another party who thinks it's a punchline to talk about folks in that way, who aren't really hurting anybody, all the while trying to use that to distract from the fact that they are trying to crush a democratically supported $15 minimum wage effort in a state that voted for Donald Trump. Trump voters want this, and their legislature, their representatives are using people's confusion about new social issues to derail a substantive conversation about their economic rights, then I will take the birthing person all day and night. And I just really think it's worth teeing up the contrast there and being really specific about what the stakes are.
But if using the terminology birthing, sure.
I've never said the word birthing person.
I'm just saying from a political standpoint, there's no question that the Democrats offer a more on economic, on a lot of the issues you're passionate about, offer a more friendly to the working class package of policies than Republicans do. So the fact that despite that, the Republicans are gaining ground and Democrats are losing ground horribly with this political bloc because they are so annoyed by things like the birthing person stuff should show Democrats that they should really stop doing that.
Well, here's what I will say. I've never heard personally, I don't like these people I'm about to mention, by the way. I don't care for them. But I've never heard Chuck Schumer say birthing person. I've never heard Joe Biden say birthing person. I've never heard Elizabeth Warren say birthing person. I've never heard Joe Biden say, Bernie Sanders say birthing person. I don't think I've ever heard an elected Democratic official say it. I have seen some,
why do they make fun of people
activist groups say it somewhere, I guess. I don't even know where the origin of it is. What I do know is that I turned on some Tucker Carlson the other night and I heard one of his guests say that women shouldn't be in the military. They're trying to put tampon in boys' bathroom. We got to get women out of the military because they're bleeding all over the place. Now, should Democrats be highlighting the kind of rhetoric that is regularly coming out of the right like that? The fact that Marjorie Taylor Greene and a bunch of these other folks have these red laser eyes that are supposed to be
Democrats do highlight that all the time.
Should we be no, they don't highlight it over the time. Every time I turn on the TV, it's a conservative talking about birthing person. I don't hear all of them talking about those specific instances, the specific language that is coming out of some sections of the far right.
In the media, Marjorie Taylor Greene is talked about every day.
Right. They talk about, they say things like this is comms advice for Democrats I'm giving you right now. It's not enough to say Marjorie Taylor Greene is crazy. It's not enough to say Donald Trump is racist, because there is plausible deniability behind those kind of vague statements. You have to be able to specifically articulate what it is that something's doing wrong. And saying things like, well, Donald Trump thinks Mexico's not sending their greatest people. To people who like Donald Trump, that's not a racist statement. That's like a factual statement that says, I think that Mexicans are great. They're just not sending the great ones. That's how you have to be in that mindset and know that when you say things like, well, he's just racist for that you lose credibility in that. Everyone should be more specific is my argument, because if you are more specific about your critique it's more difficult to breeze away and be characterized as some like crazy CRT zealot who just wants everyone to hate white children or whatever the rhetoric is.
Well, I think people like the people you mentioned, Biden himself, could do themselves a world of good by actually maybe mocking or making fun. Barack Obama used to do this. He actually, in several instances, right, criticize the kind of, fainting couch woke college students who don't want to hear dissenting opinions. He said that in commencement addresses. He did.
And I gotta
he was
say,
the most popular president of.
I think it's kind of a bummer. I think that's kind of an bummer in my view. Look,
I think that was tactically smart and something Biden and Kamala Harris wants to up her poll numbers. That's what she should do.
I'll stop on this. There was an instance of a community out west. I think it was in maybe Utah or Nevada, where there was a community there was an anti-women trans girls in sports law that was put forward. There was only one trans girl in sports in the entire state or entire community. I forget which it was. And when that law came down the pike, all the community members came together and said, actually, this is ridiculous. This is obviously just trying to attack this one child, and we're not for it, even if we don't understand trans issues, even if we're not about that. I want to live in a world where people realize that there are individuals at stake when we're having these conversations and not just abstract principles. And I don't believe, as a coalition builder who wants to have a broad populist movement that includes everybody against the 1%, against the oligarchy, that we should be throwing people under the bus to win little political battles. When Biden says ultra MAGA and Republicans put it on a shirt, it neutralizes that. And I wish that more liberals had confidence in their morals and their ethics and protecting the communities they say they care for. And when someone says, oh, birthing person is ridiculous, fine, call them something else, ask them what they want to be called. We can workshop that phrase, but it shouldn't become a punchline at the end of the day. Well, that's just my
Yeah, but there are some women who feel they are thrown under the bus by accommodations in sports, like what that category you just mentioned, for trans people. It's not always, there's not everyone in unanimous agreement that this is fine.
Sure.
There are people on the team sometimes who are frustrated with. Difficult issue, no question. But it's not just rhetoric. It's not just words sometimes. All right, we've gone on forever on this subject. I don't know where we even started with this block.
It's always a pleasure, Robby.
Oh, pleasure is all mine. Up next, Senate Republicans and West Virginia Democrat Joe Manchin blocked legislation to codify Roe v. Wade yesterday, and we'll discuss that with the rising panel. Stick around.